podcast. My name is Harvey Bublitz, and welcome back to the fourth Sunday of Advent for the week of December 21st, 2025, and I'm excited to have you here. I'm excited to get in this week's podcast, and I'm excited about a few different things. One, here we are nearing the end of Advent, which I think in and of itself, I enjoy this time of year. I enjoy the aspect of what is all going on. I enjoy the feeling that most of the time we get as a culture, at least here in the United States, where we're coming together. People seem to care about each other a little bit more. There's this sense of giving that just really radiates out of people at this time of year, and I've always enjoyed that, and I think it's a cool aspect. And especially as we are in this Advent season of preparation and we're thinking about what that all means, I enjoy that. I enjoy this, and I will get into it a little bit here in a couple minutes, but I've really been enjoying my Advent this year. It's been a little bit different of an Advent for me and how I've been approaching it, and I've noticed for me, I like this feeling. I like the way that this feels, a little bit different than a lot of other years, but let's get into that a little bit then. So the question that we had for last week, which was, where are you practicing patience during Advent? And there was a great comment brought up on how when we look specifically to our young people and children, the anticipation that they have around Christmas and often around the presents and opening the presents, them having to figure out patience and learning patience, and people who are adults helping give them other things to be able to do to help them in that time of patience, I think is a really great analogy to be thinking about and to contemplate for all of us as we look back and think back for our past Christmases and Advent seasons. I think that's an amazing one. I've also, for me, one of the things that I think has been a major difference for me this Advent is the Advent devotional that I've been going through with my wife. It's named All Creation Waits, The Advent Mystery of New Beginnings by Gail Boss. And it goes through, and you really have to read the introduction to this book, but it's the aspect of talking about how we often see the preparation of Christmas through Advent in this thing of things to do, this to do, that to do, and don't actually prepare like spiritually. And sometimes that preparation is to actually slow down. And she then has a daily devotion that works through different animals and what they do during their winter season. The different types of torpor that they have, the different types of slowdowns they have, what does it look like, each one having a very unique way, and then kind of asking, what can we learn from fill in the blank of the animal from today during our Advent journey. And I've realized as I've gone through this that one of the things that I've enjoyed a lot about this Advent is the aspect of slowing down, is the aspect of not doing a lot, the aspect of being able to maybe tackle a project that I've been more wanting to do that doesn't necessarily mean anything for Advent, but it's allowing myself to slow down to be able to get to these things and to be able to rest and relax and listen to my body and what it's actually needing. And I think that's a key aspect to Advent as well. I'll attach it down in the show notes. I have really enjoyed this. My wife and I have really been looking forward to it every night when we go through and read that. So shout out to my dad for giving that to us as a gift. And I'd highly recommend checking it out next year for your Advent journey. So let's just jump into it this week. The Old Testament reading this week is out of Isaiah chapter 7, verses 10 to 16. This is a moment where we need to understand a little bit of the history of what is going on with the tribe of Israel. This is after the tribes have split. We have the northern and southern kingdom, and we're in this text talking about King Ahaz, who is the king over the southern kingdom. Now, the northern kingdom and Damascus are trying to come together, and Damascus is non-believing people. They are coming together and trying to bring the southern kingdom into this because the Assyrians are attacking them, and they're trying to keep them away. So as we typically know, as we've been following the tribes of Israel, there's a lot of these different wars. And what King Ahaz has done is he's run. He's going to hide. And what the Northern Kingdom and Damascus wants to do is essentially take him over, get rid of him, put in basically a stand-in, fill in so that they can go on and take on the Assyrians. And this is one of the moments then that the prophet finally catches up with Ahaz. And the moment here of what Isaiah is saying to Ahaz is, when has God let you down? When has God abandoned you? Look at how God has continued to provide with food, with all these different things. And when has God let you perish? When has God abandoned you? Why then would you abandon God and run away and not trust that the Lord is going to be there with you? So at what point then do you recognize and understand that the Lord is with you? The psalm that goes with this is Psalm 80, verses 1 through 7 and 17 through 19. And this then is recognizing first and foremost that we need to be turning our ear toward God and recognizing that God then is the one who is able to restore us, to give us the desires of where God is trying to steer us, being able to get us in line with where God is trying to steer us. But then along the way, God has, again, coming from verse 5, is continued to provide for us and make sure that we are fed and nourished and to restore us so that we are able to be living in the fullness of what God has created us to be at the right hand and to be these people that is following in the light, and that we are restored and having our face shine and be that glowing example out in creation. The epistle text or New Testament text then is from Romans chapter 1, verses 1 through 7. This is the introduction into the book of Romans, and it's this recognition on declaring who Christ is and what Christ has done for us, but also recognizing that we are all in this family, this brotherhood, but almost this familyhood together of belonging with Christ, and thus allowing that faith to be shown in obedience, allowing that faith to be shown out and amongst other people and other believers, whether you are from Rome or, as we know now, beyond that, being able to share that with other people. The gospel text then is out of Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. This is a fun text. It's also a difficult text, but it's a fun text because this is one of the only places we get this. We do not have this story in any of the other gospels. And I think it's fun that Matthew includes it. This is Joseph understanding what is going on. So we have always the story of Mary being told by the angel and then her coming to all of this on what she's going to do. But now here is Joseph, who is committed. They are engaged. They're going to be together. And remember, at this point, it's not as the typical Western style engagement period. There's probably been family transfers of wealth. There has been different gifts given. And Joseph, being this righteous man, recognizes what is going on and is going to do it quietly. There's still going to be ramifications to come, but figures this is a better than just going and publicly exposing within the family and causing drama and things of that nature. And an angel then comes to Joseph and states, "Do not be afraid. The Holy Spirit has conceived the child, and you will bear him a son, and this will be the name." And when Joseph awakes from the dream, he realizes this is what's going to be the best thing and goes forward and is the one then to give Jesus's name. This recognition then of being able to trust God in what would be a very difficult situation at that moment. And yet recognizing that, okay, if God's going to say that, if God's steering me toward that, that's what I got to do, even if it's going to seem weird at different points in different places at this time. So before we jump into how faith and science come together this week, if do a shameless plug. Working Preacher, if you haven't checked out Working Preacher, I'd highly recommend it. Between their Sermon Brainwaves podcasts, their commentaries, their discussions, I use them on a weekly basis. In fact, I use them this week going through their podcast. It's really helpful. There's a lot of different history and being able to hear from different seminary professors on how they bring up different history within the text or remind you about different things or how are they looking at it. So if you haven't checked out workingpreacher.org, I'd highly recommend it. I'd also highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. I really enjoy all the layout, the text week to week, but along with also having art, prayers, hymns, different daily text readings to keep you in this, especially in this Advent season, can be very helpful. But as we are moving into Christmas and then Epiphany, I think this time of year, it is really good just to kind of have some additional readings and just really be preparing yourself, whether you're going to be in front of the pews or in the pews yourself, to make sure that you are getting the most out of each and every time that you are at worship. So I'd highly recommend checking out the Revised Common Lectionary coming from Vanderbilt's Divinity Library. Finally, I also highly recommend checking out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable or the Green Blades Rising Publications. It's either a weekly reflection or a monthly newsletter going through ecological echoes, implications, and urgencies, and going through the weekly lectionary as we do right here every week. If you enjoy listening to me talk for a half an hour each week, I know you're going to enjoy a lot of the homilies and different ecological suggestions and ideas to be thinking about in these publications. So if you haven't checked out the Green Blades Preaching Roundtable or the Green Blades Rising Publications, those will be the first links down in the show notes. I know a little ways back, we talked a little bit about some breakthrough stuff that was going on within gene therapy, and we were talking about CRISPR and Cas9. And let's just do a quick refresher on what that is. CRISPR and G9 is that we have gotten the ability to have something to be able to identify within your genetic coding, within your genome, being able to find sequences and recognize that, and then the Cas9 to be able to go in and cut that out and be able to replace it, and thus being able to make edits to your genetic code to be able to help in gene therapy and just being able to help people with genetic diseases in particular. And so this is a huge breakthrough that we have talked about previously in the podcast, and it's something that we're going to be talking a little bit about today in a little bit different way, but I think it also ties in really well. So in this last year, we have had the first ever in vivo gene editing drug. You've probably heard in vitro before. In vitro means that you're pulling cells out of somebody to kind of work with them within a petri dish or to be able to modify the genetic coding in some way, and then you're bringing them back into the body in some form. This is a little different when you're saying in vivo, which means within the living thing. So essentially, instead of pulling those cells out, you're going to just do it within the body. And so this last year, we had an amazing thing happen, partnering with the University of Pennsylvania with a child who was born and that they nicknamed KJ. He was diagnosed with carbonyl phosphate synthase 1, CPS1 deficiency. Essentially what it was is that he didn't have an enzyme that was able to break down the ammonia that is naturally occurring in your blood to put it into the urethra cycle, thus being able to get rid of it in the urination process. And this was due to this enzyme being shorter within his liver. And what he ended up having was the misfortune of having two recessive genes from his parents. So if you remember back to your genetics course, maybe in high school, there's dominant and recessive genes, and thus he got two recessive genes, which can be fine, but in this case, both of them were coding for this shorter enzyme, and thus not allowing his body to actually get rid of the ammonia within his blood. And what this does then is it causes the ammonia to build up in the brain, and high exposures to that can do irreversible damage to the brain and cause death. And it's been something then that has been studied quite a bit, but especially with a lot of genetic disorders, there hasn't been a lot of treatment necessarily put into them because a lot of our medicine has been focused on where can we put time and energy to affect the most people. And so when you're talking about genetic disease, especially in this case, that they figure that the chances of having this type of genetic disease is less than 1 in a million, it doesn't make a ton of sense financially or in a lot of different ways to be putting a lot of time and effort into this. And that's why a lot of these gene therapies and the breakthroughs that we're having with gene therapies are quite significant, because it allows us the possibility to have more personalized therapy and care, allowing for some of these more niche cases to be actually looked at and addressed a little bit more. So they noticed then within this liver enzyme that there was a misspelling within the DNA, essentially that there was one of the protein markers was the wrong type, and it was going to cause a lot of problems. So with recognition very early, one of the first things that they did for the child was put the child on a special diet low in protein to help with the reduction of having ammonia. But as you know, a lot of protein is needed in a growing person just in general. So it was one of these things that got very difficult. And as they are trying to figure this out, having a lot of different things that were kind of set up on the side to help them along the way, but it still caused for a lot of difficulties. One of the things that they figured that was going to happen, and it did happen in this case, was that they were going to basically need a liver transplant. But especially when you're dealing with an infant like that there's just a lot of complications with this, and it makes it really difficult to be able to figure out how we're going to have a liver transplant and have the baby go through that type of intensive care, essentially, that the body just is going to have to recover, and it's only been alive for such a short period of time. So what they were looking at then is having more of a patient-specific cell line, which is usually a collection then of cells from the area that they're trying to treat, and thus being able to get the exact genome of the patient to be able to work with and be able to run some additional tests with outside the body to help them in their care. In this case, because we were talking about the liver, and again with how young the patient was, it made it very difficult to be able to do that. So thus we were able to use a cell line from a patient from 1982 that they have been able to keep going, and being able to insert the genome from KJ into that. And so, like we talked about at the beginning, with CRISPR, you have CRISPR, which goes and finds the section of code, and then you have Cas9 that cuts and replaces that code. In this case, they were having to do it a little bit differently. They had to use a guide RNA with an adenine base editor to be able to replace the adenine with a guanine. And so thus it was nicknamed that it was going to be a K-Abe. So this is the new process that they were doing for this person. K being after KJ and Abe after the process of what they were working with. And one they were able to develop here over a series of months is a lipid of nanoparticles that thus had within it the edits that they were wanting to encourage the body to be able to do. So thus being able to have this K8 go in there to make those edits. Now, this was a multi-month project to be able to have this happen, even with having some different things that were going on. Like we stated, that they already had the patient-specific cell line already set up. They already also had, basically when the child was born and figured out that this was happening, they had to have a mice population to be able to help being able to do some additional testing on mice to see what was going to happen, and trying not to, totally dry run it on this infant. Also, then you had the FDA getting involved because you had an investigatory new drug app, which then they were using on a compassionate use, essentially being able to help get around some of this potential testing, and not because it wasn't necessarily client use, but essentially being able to expedite the process to be able to help this child. Now, from everything that we've been able to recognize, especially that this has happened in the last year and a half, the child has been going well. It hasn't necessarily fully cured the problem, but it is something that now is manageable. We'll put it that way. And it's something, again, as the doctors are going to have to manage long term and see how this is going. What is significant is this is the first time that we've ever had gene editing therapy within a person in vivo. So essentially within the body, that we've been able to do our own gene editing. But even to that point, there was a moment that there was a question that went to the parents and asked, is this what you want to do? Because with anything in life, there is definitely still risk where they go in and it cuts the wrong section, or it has some long-term ramifications that are negative for the child. But again, it was also at this moment that the child is also going through and having more and more side effects because the body isn't being able to produce this enzyme to actually break things down. So they did. Starting at month 6 and then giving some additional at month 7 and month 8, they were able to see significant progress in the child, KJ, from this gene therapy. There's a lot of trust. There was a lot of scary moments for those parents, and just a lot of also encouragement from the doctors that we're doing the best that we can. I think when we look and think about Advent in our preparation, and it's so easy for us to jump to the next coming of Christ, or us just thinking through and trying to get to the nativity, especially, between this Sunday, the 21st, and the next Sunday that we meet, we have Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. It's easy for us to jump there. We forget about the difficulty of what has all happened. Mary having to travel as much as she did in that trimester of time. How about even Joseph, like we hear this Sunday, and him having to wrestle with, okay, this is the person that we've gone through the process of engagement. We've gone through all the families getting to know each other and the gift swapping and all this stuff. And now she's pregnant. And yet then God coming to him and saying, this wasn't by her going out and being promiscuous. This is me. And you just have to trust me on this. And we really don't hear that much about Joseph through the rest of the Gospels. A couple times here and there, but we really don't get to hear much of Joseph. But this is one of the true moments of faith that we hear of Joseph. I think it's really easy for us when we are feeling cornered or feeling overwhelmed that we run away in some form or fashion, physically or metaphorically, like we see with King Ahaz. And we feel like we're all alone. But yet, what do we find? That God is still there, and God reminding us yet again, I have loved you and cared for you and provided for you. Why wouldn't I keep doing that? I can only imagine what those parents have gone through with KJ. I can only imagine that when the doctors, as it was quoted from the parents, when the doctors came in and said, this is what we're going to try, their comment was, it sounded like something out of a sci-fi movie. And now they literally have a child who is the first one to ever have in vitro gene therapy. Does sound absolutely crazy. But isn't that not what it would have been like for Joseph as well? Where Joseph is like, okay, what do you mean? My wife is pregnant and she didn't have relations with anyone. That God has impregnated her. What does that even mean? And again, this is also one of these moments of the Holy Spirit being referenced. Do they even fully understand what that means at this point? I don't know. Or take King Ahaz. The northern kingdom, a stronger kingdom, is partnered with somebody else to take on the southern kingdom. And yeah, it feels overwhelming. I don't want to go to war. And yet God then still stating, I'm going to continue to provide like I always have. Why would I get out of that business right now? I think in this season of Advent, one of the things that we need to do is to not get ahead of ourselves. Because if we get ahead of ourselves, it's easy for us to worry. It's easy for us to make assumptions. It's easy for us to run away. It's easy for us to get ourselves into a corner that we aren't supposed to be in. And then God meets us in that corner and says, well, I'm right here with you. If you had just asked, I could have helped. Or if you had just given me a call and said what to do, I could have showed you a path. When we think about gene therapy and what KJ has experienced, this isn't something that just came up overnight. This has been something in development for decades to get to this point to have the first one. And it's exciting. It's amazing. And that's where I think in this season of Advent, it's easy for us to get so focused narrowly on just the nativity that we miss all the years of preparation to get us to that point, to get us to the point where Christ was born. The promises and the fulfillment and the people trusting and continuing to tell the story, continuing to hold on to that truth, continuing to believe even when it seemed difficult, even when it seemed like a sci-fi story, that there was still something coming. There was still something greater. Paul writing to the Roman Christians in controlled Rome, occupied by Caesar and the Holy Roman Empire, they weren't dominant, but yet they're told to continue to hold on and believe and not give up hope. The trust that God is still working through it. And though it may not make sense at this time, trust that God is doing things. That's what we're in the business of doing. We're in business of holding on to the faith. We're in that business of trusting more. We're in that business of patiently waiting to hear what God is saying next. We're in that patiently giving God the trust and the ability, trusting that God's going to make things work. So the question I have for you this week is, where in Advent do you need to trust? Where in Advent do you need to trust? I know for me, and I think that's partially why this Advent has been so substantial for me in slowing down, is just trusting that things will happen. I enjoy the decorating and all that, but it's been a lot slower this year, just getting to it. And I don't know entirely why, but I've enjoyed the slowness of it. I've enjoyed the rest. I've enjoyed not being in the hustle and bustle. I've enjoyed it, and I resonate with, for the busy year that it's been, to try to have moments of slowing down. And if we don't allow that for ourselves, we're just going to hurt ourselves. And if we can't do that in the season of Advent, then we haven't really learned anything from the aspect of Mary and Martha. If we are saying we want to be like Martha and sit at the feet of Jesus and listen, then we need to make sure that we're giving ourselves the space to actually do that and not just work our way through it. Sometimes working is just being still, and that's a hard place to be in. But I would also argue it's a necessary place for us to be in during our Advent season. So I encourage you, get to that place, spend a little time there, and recognize that's a moment where God usually starts to speak. So, we'll wrap this up as we always do. I pray God blesses you through your faith and amazes you through science. Merry Christmas. I'll see you in the first Sunday of Christmas.